outcome of Saturday's poll.
Yes, cost of living is definitely a big one, coming from Darwin.
But where are we going to get these people to be filled in? Do we have enough nurses within Australia? I don't think so.
It's now time to meet your candidates with Jo Laverty and Adam Steer.
Well, welcome to our ABC Radio Darwin Solomon Election Forum. Welcome to those who've come to the landmark for a quiet beer after work and have found themselves knee-deep in a political candidate forum. Welcome to those. There's more than a few people who are genuinely interested in what the candidates have to say here, and I've already done a quick canvass, and it ranges everything from cost of living to the future of the Port of Darwin. We are sitting here on the edge of Solomon, and people have pointed out, hang on, you're actually in Lingiari, you know that, right? Yes, but across the road there isn't a pub. So we're here. We can see Solomon from here. And this is where we are. So thank you to those who've come and joined us at the pub at Gateway. Now, Adam.
Yes,
Can you believe it's been 3 years since we were here last? It seems like yesterday.
Yeah, it certainly does. It's been a whirlwind of 3 years, has it?
It really has. And I think maybe for the voter it feels like it's come around really quickly as well. But there's so many things that have changed in that time. We've had a pandemic. The Port of Darwin, the issue of the Port of Darwin went from being relatively obscure and not many people interested in it to it being a national issue. Cost of living has changed so much. And for the Territory, remember in June 2020, we nearly lost at least one of these seats in the Northern Territory. The Electoral Commission determined the Northern Territory was entitled to just one representative in Canberra because of our population decline. But through legislation which passed Parliament, it was announced later that year both Solomon and Lingiari would remain in their own right. And I think we can all agree two's not a lot in the federal parliament to represent such a vast land as the Northern Territory, but it's better than one.
It certainly is. Now, the seat of Solomon, of course, created in 2000 after the former electorate of the Northern Territory was redistributed. Solomon, named after the 21st Premier of South Australia, his name, of course, Mr. Solomon.
I want you to try and pronounce his actual name.
I think his name's Fabian Louis Solomon.
We did go through this before. We were like, how do you pronounce that?
He represented the Northern Territory when it was part of South Australia. The division covers Darwin, Palmerston, bar the suburbs of Farrer, Johnson, Mitchell, Yarrawonga and Zuccotti. First contested at the 2001 election, Solomon was won narrowly by the CLP's Dave Tollner. It changed hands for the first time in 2007 as Kevin Rudd swept Labor to power. But Damien Hale completed just one term before the Coalition's Natasha Griggs took the seat back. She was re-elected in 2013 before our incumbent now, Luke Gosling, won in 2016 with a 6% two-party preferred margin. That was just cut to 3% at the last poll, once again making this, I think, the 14th most marginal seat in the country. Let me introduce you to the candidates for tonight's debate. Tina MacFarlane from the CLP, hello.
Good evening, lovely to be here.
Luke Gosling from the ALP, good afternoon. We've got Kylie Bonanni from the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, thanks for having me.
And Aiya Goodrich Carttling from the Greens.
Thank you very much.
So the seat is well and truly up for grabs in a national contest, which is expected to be very close. Solomon has a character of having a mortgage-belt seat with many young families in the area, which you only need to look around where we are today to see that that's true. The increasing cost of living is going to be a major factor when voters head to the polling booth. And we are going to get to the cost of living as our topic very shortly. I would like to acknowledge as well everybody who's watching on Facebook Live this evening. Hello, and thank you for joining us wherever you are. So we'll get to the cost of living and the rules in just a moment.
Australia Votes 2022. You're listening to the Solomon Candidates Forum for the 2022 federal election with Jo Laverty and Adam Steer.
Okay, but before we get there, we need to find out just how Territorian our candidates are. I'm going to start with you, Tina MacFarlane. This is very quick fire, so I just want one-word answers very quickly. Thongs or Crocs?
Bongs.
Crackers, yay or nay?
Yay.
Luke, iced coffee or a mango smoothie?
Mango smoothie.
Mindel or Parap markets?
Parap.
Kylie, speaking of Mindel markets, sunset clapper, yay or nay?
Yay.
Camper or glamper?
I'm a glamper.
And Aiya, breakfast Luxor, yay or nay?
Yay, particularly the Luxor Eggs Benedict at Eva's Cafe
Alcon's crazy.
Yeah, it's a treat.
And wet or dry season?
Ooh, I'd say April. I like the cusp between the two because you get cool weather but still lovely storms.
We are going to get to the serious rules now that we've had a little bit of an icebreaker. So each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer a question before the bell rings. We had to buy this bell today. It turns out they're not. You don't just get them at the corner store. We had to go out of our way to go get this bell, so that's going to be quite popular and important tonight. So if a candidate listens to that first 2 minutes and they have something that they would like to say in response, please just raise your hand and you will have 30 seconds to respond. Let's all bear in mind we don't want this to turn into the second federal debate debacle that we saw on the TV and everyone said, well, that was a hot mess. All right, let's get started with one of the most important issues to so many Australians, and that is the cost of living. The Australian wage growth has just been revealed, and for the year it's at only 2.4%, which really hasn't kept up with inflation, which is at 5.1%. Consumer prices have surged so much in the last 20 years. And the last time inflation was this high was in June 2001, following the introduction of the GST. You have to go way back to December 1995 to find an equally high inflation reading that was not affected by the GST introduction. For the past 7 years, wages have repeatedly broken records for how slowly they've been growing, and people notice. People notice that it's more expensive to live, and they don't seem to have quite as much as they'd like in their pay packet at the end of the fortnight. Tina MacFarlane for the CLP. This has happened under the watch of the Morrison government. How much blame should the Morrison government take?
I think we need to acknowledge these are the lowest interest rates we've had in the last 40 or 50 years. And it was always anticipated they were going to slightly rise. Naturally, the cost of living is going to go up, and that's why they've put in mechanisms to address some of these issues. They've cut the fuel excise to 22 cents, which has been halved. They're putting out housing affordability programs with relation to being able, was announced on Sunday, to actually dip into your super for up to $50,000 or 40% of what's in your super for home buyers, so they can use that as a guarantee. They've increased the amount of federally places available for being able to access the low interest rate, the low deposit rate of 5%, and other mechanisms with regard to really promoting jobs and a really strong economy which encourages small businesses, including you've got your tax rebates. We've had the lowest tax we've got with regard to low and middle income earners, small businesses. They've got the tax write-off of $1,500. And there's a lot of mechanisms in place which are there to assist people for day-to-day living and the costs, especially transport with fuel excise.
Luke Gosling for the ALP. We've seen Labor criticise all of these measures, and you have now put your hand up. You've got 30 seconds to respond.
The real figure, Joe, is the figure today that real wages have dropped 2.7%, which is the highest drop in 20 years. That was announced today. So that is massive. And at the same time as that is happening, the Prime Minister is fighting against people on the minimum wage getting $1 extra an hour. So that's how much he cares about people on low wages being able to keep up with the cost of living.
Luke, we have seen Labor criticise, and you've just done that again, and yet in the Parliament have supported all of these short-term cost of living measures that the Coalition has laid out in the budget. Let's talk about one of those, which is the halving of the fuel excise. Should the halving of the fuel excise be extended for longer than 6 months?
Well, how can we tell right now, Joe? I mean, what's happened is the federal government has given some cash payouts before an election and has cut fuel excise until September to get it through an election. Now, come September, let's see what the situation is, but it's basically a short-term sugar hit that we supported. Because at the moment people are finding it incredibly expensive to fill up their car, so it was a worthwhile measure to do.
And so you think maybe in 6 months the government, if you take government as the Labor Party, will support it again if it's necessary?
What we don't want to do, Joe, is have a situation where the fuel excise is dropped, but the price of fuel just keeps going up. That's more corporate welfare that we've seen from the Morrison government. Let's not forget this is a government that gave $40 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars in JobKeeper to companies that didn't need it. 40 billion. So we've had enough of unnecessary corporate welfare at a time when he doesn't want, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, doesn't want to give a $1 an hour pay rise to the lowest paid Australians in our country on the minimum wage.
Do you think if Labor Party takes power on Saturday, that you'll try and get that $40 billion back?
Joe, what is done is done. We never would have designed a program that gave out $40 billion to companies that didn't need it. We pushed the federal government for a wage subsidy scheme. In fact, the government, Scott Morrison, said that it was reckless. But we pushed for that to occur because we didn't want businesses to go under. We didn't want employees to lose their job. So we supported it, but we need to move forward.
Tina MacFarlane, you had your hand up.
I'd just like to briefly respond. We've had a pandemic for the last 2 years, and Australia has come out one of the leading economies. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates, and I think it's an absolute credit to how the coalition government has handled the last 2 years in managing the economy, and we're nearly amongst the leading economies throughout the world. So I can't see, given the circumstances, how they could be critical of what was rolled out in the duration with the job support.
We'll move on to Aiya Goodrich, Carttling for the Green. We saw people with insecure work hardest hit during the pandemic lockdown. Around 1 in 4 people in Australia's total workforce are casual with no paid leave entitlements. That's not including people on fixed-term contracts. How would you fix this, you, the Greens?
Yeah, I think it's really important to acknowledge that casual workers, particularly young people and particularly women, have really lost out during the pandemic, which is why it's really important that we improve on workers' rights and ensure that if people do want a permanent position that is available to them. The Greens will also introduce a livable income guarantee to make sure that people are supported. And I think just quickly, what is really important to acknowledge there is that the unemployment rate doesn't actually reflect the underemployment rate. So if you work 1 hour a week, you are classed as employed. And there's many people across this country who don't have enough work and want to be working more and aren't able to be, but they're not reflected in the unemployment rate. Along with a livable income guarantee, the Greens are also interested in raising the rate of all income support to $88 a day to be above the poverty line. And too many people in this country live in poverty, and in such a wealthy country, it really doesn't need to be that way. We've got political parties who put more emphasis on big corporations making a profit than on everyday people getting by. And as someone who is a student nurse and a renter, I know how tough it is right now to be able to, have enough money to do the things that you want to do and just live your life. For a lot of people, they've been really stressed for the last 2 years and will continue to be unless parties make sure that they're actually doing what's best for everyday people and not for big corporations.
Kylie Bonanni for the Liberal Democrats. How would you tackle the cost of living differently to the other candidates?
Thanks, Jo. The Liberal Democrats, they're thinking a little differently to these guys. So, look, for us, Australians are doing it tough right now. Inflation has hit a 20-year high at 5.1%. Cost of fuel, housing, energy and food costs all rising. We support several actions that can be implemented immediately to provide relief to millions of Australians. Immediately removing the remaining excise on fuel, lower taxes for individuals and businesses, develop our own oil and gas resources to remove reliance on countries such as Russia, adopt workforce solutions such as the removal of mandates immediately, and removing the cap on the hours aged pensioners can work, which will help drive up productivity. But in talking about what Luke was just saying, how the Prime Minister is wanting to put an increase just $1 a week, that is added pressure to businesses. So that's business owners that have to wear that cost. So the Liberal Democrats are looking at supporting and introducing a flat tax rate of 20% and a 40% tax-free threshold, which would put more money into the hands of Australians, easing cost of living pressures and allowing them to save more easily for a home.
Gosling, you've got your hand up.
I just wanted to point out that it's La La Land. A real productivity benefit comes from something like cheaper childcare. Now, families are really struggling with the cost of childcare. Under Labor's plan for cheaper childcare, 96% of Territory families right here are going to be better off, and that's going to allow them to go back to work if they want to, but it's going to allow them to pay the bills. That's what real reform is, not just plucking some number about tax that'll be paid.
You are on ABC Radio. Darwin, Adam and Jo Laverty with you as we hear from some of the candidates for the seat of Solomon in the upcoming election. If you are listening on Facebook at the moment or watching us on Facebook, then you please put in your questions. We will get them to the candidates if we have time. Graham is asking, and I'm going to give 30 seconds to each of the candidates. Graham is asking, housing and high rentals are an issue for me. I would like to know what the candidates propose to improve for the housing affordability crisis and the social housing shortage. I'm going to start with you, Aiya, from the Greens.
Thanks, Adam. So the Greens plan is to build 1 million new public and social houses across the country over the next 20 years. At the moment in the Northern Territory, the wait time for social housing is up to 8 years for families to be able to get a home, which is just really not okay. And with the Greens' proposal of building 1 million new homes, it would absolutely obliterate the wait lists that we have, and particularly for people, for First Nations people and for women and children fleeing family and domestic violence, because we know that they're at higher risk of homelessness.
That's Aiya, Goodrich, Carttling from the Greens, Kylie Bonanni from the Liberal Democrats.
The federal government agreed to provide $550 million over 5 years for remote housing. It is up to the Northern Territory government to spend that money, but it has spent only a fraction of it. An audit of the program 3 years in reveals the NT government has built just 363 bedrooms out of a promised 1,950. If elected, I would push for greater oversight of the program and introduce benchmarks to ensure the Territory government is meeting its responsibilities.
You do understand, though, that we've been in a pandemic and there's been biosecurity zones, so some of that restrictions on the building has not been the fault of any government.
No, but they should still be held accountable for their rollout of things, so which they're not doing.
Luke Gosling from the ALP. How would you improve housing affordability and the social housing shortage?
Federal Labor will establish in government a Housing Australia fund of $10 billion and will build 30,000 affordable homes throughout the country. That's really going to help on the supply side, particularly for first responders, frontline workers, for domestic violence victims and for veterans. And I've made my own commitment about that for Darwin, for supported accommodation. But we've also got a plan that we have articulated over the last couple of days, where we're going to put equity to help first home buyers buy homes by the Commonwealth taking equity in that home.
And finally, Tina MacFarlane from the Country Liberals.
Am I able to ask a question?
I want to ask this question of you. How would you, in government, help with the housing affordability crisis and social housing shortage?
Will encourage more people to get into their own homes and to buy it, and with the programs being rolled out by the coalition, that allows them that opportunity to do that. And with a strong economy, with strong jobs and strengthening small business, it allows people to have more employment and money to be getting into their own homes, and for the actual government to increase motivation and small businesses to be building those homes.
Aiya, you put your hand up.
I just think it's really important with what Scott Morrison's brought out in the last few days about being able to dip into your super to be able to buy a home. a lot of young people don't have enough super to even be able to start paying for their homes. You know, people who've suffered from insecure work and underemployment, it actually doesn't address, you know, my generation and the struggles that we will face to be able to get onto the housing market.
Australia Votes 2022. You're listening to the Solomon Candidates Forum for the 2022 federal election with Jo Laverty and Adam Steer.
Yeah, we are here at Lambridge in Landmark, in Palmerston, hearing from some of the candidates for the upcoming election on Saturday in the seat of Solomon. Let's move to the long-term alcohol restrictions in dozens of Aboriginal communities in the NT are set to end in July. They will see restrictions brought in under the intervention under Stronger Futures legislation lifted. It means communities currently under these restrictions will stop being dry unless residents apply to retain their dry status in an opt-in mechanism. We've seen an increase in the amount of people from community to Darwin and Palmerston over the past 12 months, and with that, alcohol-fuelled antisocial behaviour has increased in town. Aiya, Goodrich, Carttling from the Greens. The federal government chose not to extend the Stronger Futures legislation. Should there be restrictions on alcohol in remote communities? Where does the Greens stand on that?
What I think is really missing here is the community consultation for this process. So a lot of communities have been complaining they actually haven't been consulted in the lead up to these bans being lifted. And what the Greens and, you know, myself and the Greens would prefer was, rather than an opt-in model, to have an opt-out model. And this model should have come in under a year at least of consultation with each community individually. We know what's really important is for communities to have self-determination in what they need, because we can't come in as outsiders and pretend that we know what's best for communities. Their problems are not our problems, and I mean, we should address them, but we should support them to address them themselves. So yeah, like I said, we think the better way to do it would be to have an opt-out option so that they don't fall out and succumb to the possibility of this alcohol-related violence increasing again now that it's wrapping up.
Kylie Bonanni from the Liberal Democrats. If community leaders want social clubs in their communities, should they have the right to establish them?
Yes, I agree with that. We cannot teach responsible alcohol through prohibition. It doesn't work. So the Liberal Democrats want to empower Indigenous communities to control how alcohol is consumed. We support communities having the right to determine if they want a licensed club in their community. They have the power to control the hours, products sold, money raised for community improvements. We cannot teach responsible use of alcohol if it's not done in the community. And for all licensing, anybody knows in the hospitality industry, they are aware of the requirements that can be put around each liquor licence that is there. I've been spoken quite heavily about this with my partner, so there are really tight restrictions. Communities they have the freedom to choose if they want alcohol available in the community. They have direct input into the licence conditions by which alcohol can be consumed. For example, the quantity, the strength of the alcohol, and the hours alcohol can be consumed, whether it's with a meal and it can be monitored. It can be monitored in the community.
Luke Gosling from the ALP. What about you? Would social clubs in remote communities mean less antisocial behaviour in cities like Darwin, Palmerston?
That'll remain to be seen. I think it's important that the intervention measures come to a close. What's unfortunate, though, is that the coalition at the federal level has had almost a decade to prepare for this, and it doesn't seem like the consultation has been done. There were alcohol management plans that were never put into place. So it's really now a matter for the communities themselves to have the conversation, self-determination, to work out what they want. But you can understand that there is a concern in some communities about an increase in violence. So consultation needs to be happening with different sectors. I know from my own perspective, when I worked putting, before politics, doctors and nurses in the communities, there always was a concern if there was a free-for-all with alcohol. So I'm sure that the communities will be having those discussions now about what they want for their communities, what is sustainable, what is sensible, and what is going to protect people.
What about for you, Tina MacFarlane from the CLP? With alcohol always comes social ills, no matter where you are or who you are. Poor health outcomes, domestic abuse rises with alcohol. Is introducing alcohol back into communities the right thing to do?
I think it's important to remember that when it was first introduced, it was for a limited time. Then I think it was Julie Gillard in 2013. She actually extended it for another 10 years. So Labor did know that this was part of what was happening in the communities, and also the communities knew that it was going to come to an end. It was never going to be a permanent thing. I've travelled throughout a lot of communities throughout the Territory, and I've seen communities where the system works really well. Admittedly, most are based on mid-strength beer, and they have restricted trading hours, and there's limitations when you go in. You've got to drive, you've got to show a licence, there's all sorts of restrictions. Like on the Tiwi Islands, Goombalanya, it works extremely well there. I am very reluctant to say that it really needs to consult closely with the community, because there are some communities that have elevated domestic violence and abuse towards obviously children, and we've got to think of the welfare and safety. So I think it should be a matter for people, as the Greens mentioned, to opt in, but it does need to be thorough, and I think everyone knew it was coming, and it can't be laid to blame that the federal government needs to intervene again.
Aiya, you've got your hand up for a 30-second response.
Sorry, we're supporting an opt-out model, so communities will stay in unless they choose to opt out. Because I think it's really important that we understand and acknowledge that communities know what is best for their own spaces.
Thanks for that.
My apologies, sorry.
And the irony of us debating how communities and the Aboriginal people in those communities can drink and consume alcohol, debating that whilst we're in a pub, all enjoying beers and rums and coke. The irony is not lost on me. We do have a Facebook Live question, which I'll put to the candidates now. Penny, thank you very much for watching. What do the candidates think about saving any further deforestation of Lee Point, Muirhead areas by limiting further proposed housing subdivision? There are other suitable locations, such as Berrima, Northcrest, for future housing, instead of damaging the natural bush and foreshore at Lee Point and Buffalo Creek. I'll start with you on this one, Luke Gosling.
Thanks. It's a good question, and I have been engaged with this in my job as a member for Solomon, meeting with Defence Housing Australia about their plans, getting an understanding of the impact on the area down there. I've even driven in my four-wheel drive through the Lee Point area with the Friends of Lee Point to ascertain the area in which it is proposed that DHA is going to develop. There is no doubt with increased defence employees up here that there will be a need for more housing. However, as the questioner points out, that can be elsewhere as well, Berrima or other locations, and I've been talking with Defence Housing Australia about that.
That's 30 seconds. Thank you very much. Probably took too much time with your story about the four-wheel drive. Tina MacFarlane, can I get the response from you, please?
Sorry, can you ask the question?
The question, it's a long question, but basically what are you going to do about saving Lee Point and Muirhead from any further deforestation when there are other locations more suitable?
I'm extremely proactive, and I've spoken to them a lot with regard to this. I think the Northern Territory Labor government needs to stop the process. They need to go back to the consultation. The people of Lee Point have not been consulted. The road infrastructure planning is an absolute shambles. It is a Territory government responsibility, the planning. It may be federal land, but it's then up to the contractor to actually comply with Territory government and lands planning legislation. So I think they should go back and start again.
Aiya?
Yeah, absolutely. I support, and the Greens, probably unsurprisingly, are really in favour of the protection of urban forests. Lee Point is a really beautiful area. There's a lot of beautiful bird species and native species there that need to be protected. So As the Friends of Lee Point have asked, I support the moratorium on the development down there to make sure that proper consultation can happen with the community close by, as well as environmental evaluations to make sure that it's viable.
Thank you, Aiya, Goodrich, Carttling, and Tina MacFarlane. Oh, sorry, Kylie Bonanni, sorry.
No, that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to come out strongly and say I support the development of Lee Point. I 100% support that project.
Nailed it. No, you nailed your time limit. Thank you very much for that. This is ABC Radio Darwin, the Solomon Forum.
Australia Votes 2022. You're listening to the Solomon Candidates Forum for the 2022 federal election with Jo Laverty and Adam Steer.
Let's move to a local issue. Now, this has been a bit of a sleeper issue because when it first happened, it didn't really raise that much ire or attention. However, in the last 12 months, it has become a national security hotbed of debate. I am, of course, speaking about Darwin Harbour and the 99-year lease of Darwin Port to Lambridge and the $1.5 billion mentioned in the budget for port infrastructure, whatever that may be. Luke Gosling with the ALP, do you believe the 99-year lease of Darwin Harbour, the Port of Darwin, should be revoked?
I don't know if you were here, Joe, in 2015, but I was out very solid against it, and I have been the whole time. I have been consistently against the leasing of our strategic northern port to a foreign entity. And I said that in 2015, and I've said it consistently ever since. And what a lot of people don't realise is not only was Scott Morrison the Treasurer at the time and gave a $20 million sweetener to the NT government, but he's also been paying for our border protection vessels to be berthed at Lambridge. $35 million plus for our own security vessels to be berthed at Lambridge. If this keeps going the way it is, 50 years from now, we would have paid off, the Commonwealth, Australian taxpayers would have paid off Lambridge for the cost of our port that should be in our hands. And we're waiting for a security review by the security agencies to be briefed to Federal Labor so we know what the go is, because at the moment they're just Scott Morrison is sitting on the review and not letting everyone know what the go is, and that's just not good enough. Scott Morrison was the Treasurer. Scott Morrison was the Treasurer when this happened. One of his own cabinet ministers took a job of nearly $1 million for the Chinese company. I mean, it's just an outrage. It's treasonous. And now we know that there's been millions of dollars of taxpayer money paid to the Chinese company to keep our own boats there. It's a disgrace. Should never have happened.
Would Labor build a new port at Middle Arm?
And this is exactly the problem. We're committed to the $1.5 billion for infrastructure at Middle Arm, but it's not clear what Defence's role is in that infrastructure. Can you believe that? The federal government hasn't talked to Defence about what their requirements are for a second facility. It's an absolute shambles. They're not coming clean with what the security review says, and that, frankly, is unacceptable.
So you've heard a round of applause there, and I have to say a lot of these people were the very same people that I walked up to and said, there's a political debate happening tonight, and they had no idea. So these aren't plants by Luke Gosling. These are people who are here listening to the debate, quite by accident, some of them. I'll move on to Tina MacFarlane for the CLP. Now that you look back... Oh, you did, you put your hand up for a question, a 30-second question. Go ahead.
I just would have to correct Luke with regard to the sweetener. It wasn't a sweetener. It was available, the $20 million, 19 to be exact, was available to every state and territory where the federal government, they privatised an asset. And I also would like to say that Michael Gunner was on the board when they did the review prior to going into the decision to look for somebody to buy the port. He was fully aware. The Labor government was fully aware.
Tina MacFarlane, looking back now, was it a mistake for the CLP to sell the port?
There's been a federal inquiry in relation to that, and they have said that everything is above board, everything was done properly, and they have now announced the $1.5 billion, which you were referring to earlier, with regard to further port development, dredging, facilities, to facilitate more export and more production coming out of Port Darwin. I I trust the federal government. They did a review and it was a thorough review, and they've done it twice, and they said that everything was above board, but they now have brought in legislation, so this isn't able to be done again, but they couldn't intervene at the time.
Sure, so that everything was done properly by the book, but was it the right decision at the time?
I wasn't involved in that decision. It was a territory government decision, and all I can go on is what the reports have shown us.
Is the government promising to build a new port at Middle Arm?
They're promising to have more facilities with regard to dredging, manufacturing, and facilities and services available.
Can I have the same argument with you that I had with Barnaby Joyce? But there's no port where you're talking about building this infrastructure, so what's the point of putting all of that in place if there's not a port there?
Well, they're talking about doing the dredging so it becomes available. Not the port, there's dredging so we can actually use facilities that are already there, an expansion of that.
Luke Gosling, you had your hand up for a 30-second response.
Just the fact that the review hasn't been released. Why? Why in the lead up to a federal election would a federal government sit on a review about the security implications of selling our northern strategic port to a company, a Chinese company, linked to the Chinese Communist Party? It is a concern that that review has not been released, and coming to government, if we are successful after Saturday, we'll be seeking answers to that review and taking appropriate steps.
Aiya, Goodrich, Carttling for the Greens. Do you have concerns about a Chinese company having a 99-year lease on the Darwin port?
Look, the privatisation of what should be public infrastructure is deeply concerning. But I would say the day-to-day security risk of a Chinese-owned company leasing the Port of Darwin, there isn't any actual risk to us day-to-day. We're not at war with China. I think this is being used as a big scare campaign, really, by a lot of political parties around at the moment. But no, I don't think it's right that was ever leased to them in the first place. And we need to make sure that, this public infrastructure isn't privatised, so that we don't need to throw more money at it when we have a perfectly functional port there. If we hadn't leased it in the first place, we wouldn't need to be doing that.
Kylie, Bonanni for the Liberal Democrats. A new manufacturing hub at Middle Arm could cause significant adverse impacts to human health, according to an environmental report released by the Northern Territory government. Should it go ahead considering this?
Jo, if I can just go back to the previous question so that I can put our stance forward, the Liberal Democrats on the Darwin port. We feel that the Darwin port is far too important to not be controlled by Australians, so we support cancelling of the lease. So I'd just like to get that on the record, that Senator McMahon released a media release today stating that she's calling for the cancellation of that, the Darwin port lease to be cancelled.
And to the question that I asked you?
Sorry, I forgot that.
It's okay, I'll start again. A new manufacturing hub at Middle Arm could cause significant adverse impacts to human health, according to an environmental report released by the Northern Territory government. Should it go ahead considering this?
Look, I think if due diligence is done, then that's something that I would probably support. It's something that I'm not fully across, but it's something that I think that I would support.
You are on ABC Radio Darwin. Adam Steer with you, with Jo Laverty for our special Solomon debate. Let's go to some Facebook Live questions. Rodney asks, please question the candidates if they're going to support the ban on live exports. I'm going to start with you, Aiya, from the Greens. What do you say?
I love the manners from Rodney there. The Greens don't support live exports. We need to ensure that cruelty to animals is brought under control. We need to ensure that, factory farming is gotten rid of so that, all of this cruelty that's going on doesn't continue to happen.
So how do you propose to replace the multi-million-dollar industry that is live exports in the Northern Territory?
Sure. So we need to have real investment in sustainable agriculture to ensure that farms in the Territory are able to, to provide for the Territory.
Kylie Bonanni from the Liberal Democrats, you support live exports?
I definitely support live exports. Look where we live. We're surrounded by the cattle industry, so I definitely support that.
And Luke Gosling from the ALP.
Yeah, there is no ban on live cattle exports, and there shouldn't be, and there won't be under federal Labor. We'll continue to work closely with the industry to ensure that the regulatory framework that's in place, is maintained, is suitable, animal welfare is kept up. But we 100% support the cattle industry, the live cattle industry, and it's really important for our relationship with Indonesia, as well as an important driver for our economy here in the Territory.
And Tina MacFarlane from the CLP.
I absolutely support it. The NLIS, the National Livestock Identification System, was brought into place. It is working very well. It's ensuring livestock are transported overseas safely, and there's accountability and tracing. So I 100% support it. It's the backbone of the Territory, and I support it.
Thank you for everyone who's listening on Facebook Live. You can send your questions through on ABC Facebook, ABC Radio Darwin. Next up, we're going to talk about the crisis in worker shortages.
Australia Votes 2022. You're listening to the Solomon Candidates Forum for the 2022 federal election with Jo Laverty and Adam Steer.
I don't know if you've been to the dentist lately. It's a pretty terrible experience. I went there yesterday, and I bumped into a number of folk, not only the dentists, but the people who were working in retail. There was people from fishing and tackle shops. There were hairdressers there, and they were all saying the same thing. Oh my goodness, where are our workers? Of course, the dry season is sitting here. We're hoping for the tourists to come, but do we have enough workers to service all of those tourists that we're inviting with open arms? And as I said, it's not only hospitality, it's education, it's aged care, it's disability service, it's health, construction, manufacturing, automotive sector, even your dentist. So the question for you is, how are we going to help fix that shortage? I'm going to start with you, Kylie Bonanni, from the Liberal Democrats. What do you believe is the answer to Darwin's labour shortage?
First and foremost, remove the mandates. I think it's too much red tape for businesses across the board. Adopt sensible workforce solutions, such as removing the cap on the hours aged pensioners can work. This will help drive up productivity. Look, I think that there are sensible options out there. We just need to think a little bit outside the box. So the mandates are definitely strangling businesses at the moment.
So for you, it's lifting mandates, is it?
Oh, not just lifting mandates, but I think that it needs to happen. It definitely needs to happen.
Aiya, Goodrich, Carttling from the Greens. Why is it that some industries, would you say, are finding it so difficult to attract staff?
As a healthcare worker myself, and someone who's worked in healthcare before COVID came to the Territory and during, I think it's really important to acknowledge that these shortages in workers are not just recent. They've been going on for a long time for a lot of industries. I think what we're seeing, particularly in healthcare, is a lot of workers who are really burnt out and actually leaving the industry because they don't have enough support to be able to do their jobs properly. But the other thing that we need to address is people actually being able to get to work. You know, I was talking to a nurse today who's just about to come back from maternity leave, and she is really concerned because it's going to cost her almost more to pay for childcare and early childhood education than she will be getting paid to return to work. So the Greens have a plan to provide free early childhood education to ensure that anyone who wants to get into the workforce is able to get into the workforce.
How are you going to cost that, though? I've just finished paying 4 years of childcare. It's an extraordinary amount of money. You could put someone, I could have bought a lot of new cars out of it. How would you afford that?
Yeah, of course. Our whole policy platform has been fully costed, so we are able to. I'm not an economist myself, though. So what I will say is the really important thing that we need to be doing is ensuring that everybody's paying their fair share of tax. You know, 1 in 3 major corporations in Australia pay no tax, and billionaires and higher earners under Scott Morrison are getting tax breaks. So if we make sure that everybody pays their fair share of tax, we will be able to do things like get free early childhood education, get free dental into Medicare. I've been to the dentist recently too, and it costs a lot and it's really hard. And I haven't been for the previous 4 years because I hadn't been able to afford it. And that actually accumulates over time. People end up having to spend more.
So Aiya College raises some interesting issues there about childcare, about tax. But I want to get back to this base question about how are we going to fix the workers' shortage or the workers' crisis shortage that we have here in the Northern Territory. Luke Gosling from the ALP. Does the federal government need to make a regional migration agreement with the Territory?
We have the DARMA for the Northern Territory, which is a designated area migration agreement, which assists the Territory. But one of the biggest challenges for Territory businesses is this workforce issue, lack of skilled workers. But we've got a lack of apprentices coming through the system. We've got to invest in our young kids, Territory kids. I mean, there's 70,000 less apprentices around the country than there was when we were last the federal government a decade ago. 70,000 less apprentices. We're going to have fee-free, so no fee, 465,000 places for TAFE for young Australian kids, and also 20,000 new places for university, so that Aussie kids get the qualifications that we need. And obviously, we also need to look overseas. That's where migration agreements come into place, as well as the expansion of the Pacific Island Worker Scheme that we've already announced during the campaign.
Yeah, so a free TAFEs or those suggestions that you have there, that's in 3 or 4 years' time. What exactly would you be putting in immediately after Saturday if you were to win power?
We've announced a massive expansion of the Pacific Island worker programs. That's going to help our agricultural industries, for example. But also, this is going to hit the road immediately. These fee-free TAFE places are going to come online immediately. The point is that the coalition has left our kids behind. Think about it. The pandemic for 2 years, they haven't been able to travel overseas, and there's 70,000 less apprentices. We'll make sure if the federal government is funding a project, 1 in 10 workers will be an apprentice. So our kids will get the jobs, our kids will get skilled up, and that'll fill our shortages. It's absolutely got to happen.
Tina MacFarlane from the Country Liberal Party. What has the federal government done since COVID to try and fix the labour shortage in Darwin and in Palmerston?
I spoke to the Immigration Minister, Alec Hawke, when he was up here some 6 weeks ago. They're increasing the amount of people that can immigrate over here. They're trying to wind back a lot of the impediments that are disallowing them. They're adding incentives, so there is assistance with regard to their visas coming in. They're introducing the agricultural visa, so all the people on the mango farms and all those sort of farms, they can actually try and get people in now. I've also been speaking with the university with regard to expansion of positions, to have med students, to have a standalone university so med students can actually train at CDU, and we can actually have our own people that can then, as students, they can then go and participate at the hospital as well. But yeah.
I was speaking to the Vice-Chancellor of
Yes.
Charles Darwin University this morning. He
Yes.
said the Prime Minister has now announced 20 places for medical students in Cairns, but none for Darwin. What's going on there?
I'm not sure what's going on there. I spoke to them and I've advocated for them. Currently, we're in partnership with Flinders University, and currently the NT government, in partnership with another government agency, funds those medical students. The proposal I haven't put forward to him yet because I'm not an elected member, but I said I will champion that. We need to have our own medical facility up here in Darwin, and that is part of helping relieve the hospital system with regard to having people go in there, and we're actually developing med students that are capable of dealing with tropical diseases.
It's ABC Radio Darwin, the Solomon Election Forum, and thank you to those who are watching on Facebook Live. We'll take another question. Amber asks, how do each of these candidates propose to protect trans kids in regards to Morrison's planned religious discrimination bill? I'll start with Tina first.
He's made it very clear, like we have with relation to the gay rights and everything, and that is the position. He hasn't changed anything, and currently the legislation, it was voted on, and he accepted that that is the position of it. With regard to trans kids, I haven't seen him make a formal position or statement with relation to it, but I think we need to really consult with them and take it all into consideration.
Kylie, Bonanni?
That's something that I'll agree with Tina on. I think greater consultation is needed around that area, so I think I'd need to be guided by the experts around that. It's not something that I'm familiar with, and I wouldn't want to offend anyone or make a comment on something that I'm not fully confident on.
Luke Gosling.
Federal Labor fought for the rights of trans kids during the debate, and we got the government to change their position because members of the government actually crossed the floor and said, we don't want trans kids to be victims of essentially a culture war being waged by Scott Morrison to try and keep his right wing of his own party happy. It was a disgrace that it went down that way. Federal Labor does believe, though, that people of faith should be free to express themselves, but it shouldn't be at the expense of trans kids or anyone else for that matter.
And Aiya, Goodrich, Carttling.
It's been absolutely disgusting to see gender diverse people and trans people used as political pawns during this election campaign. You know, we've seen it happen time and time again, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that these people already experience disproportionate mental health problems, and when they go into systems to be able to get help with these problems, they're met with transphobia, they're met with homophobia, they're met with people who don't understand the struggles that they face and what they're going through.
Thank you very much for those messages and questions coming through on Facebook. This is ABC Radio Darwin.
Australia Votes 2022. You're listening to the Solomon Candidates Forum for the 2022 federal election with Jo Laverty and Adam Steer.
According to the ABC's Vote Compass survey, concerns over climate change are breaking the traditional left-right political divide. And the survey told us that more Australians mention climate change as their number one issue above any other. Aiya, Goodrich, Carttling for the Greens. The major parties have refrained from making climate change a major issue of their campaign. Why do you think this is?
I think, to put it bluntly, it's because they're receiving big donations from gas and coal companies. You know, the Greens are the only party that don't accept major corporate donations, and that's why, you know, we aren't held to continue to support coal and gas going forwards. The Greens' plan is to reach net zero by 2035 or sooner. We are living in a climate crisis. As someone who was born in the Territory, I've seen the climate change before my eyes. In the short 23 years that I've been on this earth, I've seen it change, and I just cannot believe that government after government is refusing to acknowledge that this is an issue. You know, we've got in the last year alone, 23 major gas companies sold over $49 billion of our gas and didn't pay a single cent in tax. And all of these profits were funneled offshore and overseas. And, you know, us as the general population, we are seeing every single day with fires and floods that just keep happening and happening. We are seeing the impacts of climate change, but what we're not seeing is the proposed benefits that we get from oil and gas mining in Australia.
Luke Gosling for the ALP. Last election, the ALP took a 2030 emissions reduction target of 45% on a 2005 level. You've gone backwards, taking a 43% target to this election. Can you really claim to be a party of climate change action when in reality you're going backwards?
Yeah, of course we can. Anyone that's got a memory longer than 10 years will remember what happened during the Rudd and Gillard years, where there were serious attempts made to start structurally moving. That's what business wanted, structurally moving our economy. I mean, we should be leading the world in solar, but there's been 10 years of wasted action on climate change with Tony Abbott, with Malcolm Turnbull couldn't get anything through his party room, and now with Scott Morrison. It's just 10 years of waste. Now, we should have the biggest solar farm in the world right here in the Territory. And we will, partially because I introduced the company to the NT government and they're cracking on. Gas has a role, but it's got to stack up. It's got to stack up commercially, it's got to stack up environmentally. And Federal Labor will make sure that we get that balance right. And I don't think you can really trust anyone that is not prepared to say that there's been a scientific inquiry, we've got recommendations, they must be followed to protect the environment for the future.
Tina MacFarlane from the Country Liberal Party. Queensland Senator Matt Canavan has been helping you campaign in Darwin during this campaign. He said that government's net zero emissions target by 2050 is dead. Do you agree with him?
The coalition is a very diverse group of people, and we take into account that everyone has their own opinions. In the Territory, we don't have coal mining. I do not agree with that opinion. I support the Morrison government opinion. I support the net 2050 target. It's based on, technology, not taxes. We've got to keep our economy going. An incredible amount of money does come from mining within Australia, and we've got to transition. I am 100% in support of solar panels. We've got, in fact, at our own house, we've got solar panels. We've got grey water wastage. We use rainwater. We've got tanks. And I think some of the developments going on in the Territory are absolutely fantastic. And I champion that. But I think there's a balance. And I think we've got to keep the economy going.
Kylie Bonanni from the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats state that cutting Australia's emissions will do nothing to abate climate change. Do you believe in climate change science?
Net zero by 2050 is unachievable. I'm a fan of Matt Canavan, and I think he should be with the Liberal Democrats instead of the Nats. So,
do you believe in the science of climate change?
Yes, I do. Yes. But I feel... no, it's not actually a problem to me at the moment. I feel that jobs and security are more important.
Yes. Aiya has her hand up, unsurprisingly there. You've got 30 seconds to respond.
For far too long, most political parties in Australia have tried to sell us this lie that we can either have jobs and a strong economy or we can have climate action. That's not the case. Acting on climate would create hundreds of thousands of jobs across Australia. The Greens' plan to transition to 100% renewable energy is ensuring that no one loses their jobs. We will retrain workers and reskill them to be able to transition into renewable sectors.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause for our four candidates that we have sitting here. Aiya, Goodrich, Carttling, Kylie Bonanni from the Liberal Democrats, Luke Gosling from Labor, and Tina MacFarlane from the Country Liberals. That wraps up our special debate tonight. Thank you for everybody that's been on Facebook. And Jo, you can hear all this again tomorrow on ABC Radio.
Won't that be exciting for all the people who were just here for a quiet beer and didn't know they were going to be here for a political debate? You can listen to it again tomorrow morning. You can even go back and watch it a third time on Facebook Live as it's saved. Thanks very much to our crew who's working behind the scenes as well. Michael Franchi. Oh, yeah, nice. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Clarkey, Marie, and Cherie over there as well. Oh, and Jack. Sorry, and Jack, who is actually the number one man. Go, Jack. Jack Hislop, who is the producer of the breakfast program and pretty much constructed this whole thing, and I nearly forgot him. How awkward is that?
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night.